The Behemoth Brewing Company presents the Department of Conversation with Pat Brittenden. Behemoth, give me something hoppy.
Oh, well, good morning to you. Welcome back to the Department of Conversation. You are with me, Pat Brittenden, and our very special guest, a very excited conversation. I said to you before this, Emma Ferris is joining us, that I was quite excited to have this conversation, but it's kind of a sucky conversation overall. Like the bigger picture of what it is, what it means, and what it means, not just for you, but as a story of fraud and significant fraud to the wider population at the moment. Emma Ferris, good morning and welcome.
Kia ora. Thanks, Pat, for having me along.
Oh,
Appreciate,
mate.
having a conversation.
Fucking excited and looking forward to it. On your website, which we'll get to what you do and stuff a bit later on, I think, but it talks about you as a public speaker, an acupuncturist, a Pilates instructor, a registered physiotherapist with over 15 years of clinical experience. So you're a smart lady. And so often we hear these conversations about people getting frauded, defrauded out of money. And people are like, "Ugh, how could that? That would never happen to me. That would never happen to me." But you're obviously an educated, intelligent, smart human being, and it happened to you. Now, your story is out there. I've seen it on Stuff and in the Herald. Obviously, you do a well-received podcast, Conning the Con, as well, if people want to check it out. So, I was going to say, we don't really need to go really massively into a big long story, but can you give us like the 3 or 4 minute truncated version of what happened to you and how you got, taken and kind of where you're at now? So that, give us that in a nutshell, and then let's talk about the whole story.
Absolutely. So it was about 2 years ago now, it's coming up to its conniversary, that I found out the guy that I'd been dating for just under 6 months has actually had wasn't who he said he was. So he had a different alias and a different name. He changed his name legally so that when I had those gut reactions and feelings of going, something isn't right, I couldn't actually find who he was and the background to it. So he'd worked for that time, for those 5.5 months, to build a relationship and I guess, groom me, which I don't really like saying, but that really is part of the techniques, and work his way into my life. And so that day in April the 8th, I think it was, April 9th, it was purely from good friends of mine that dug deeper than I had. And I had been digging, my gut was going off, but I still couldn't find that information. And these great friends of mine were, if it hadn't happened that day, it would have been a completely different trajectory, because the day before that I'd invested a hefty amount of money into this business arrangement, because that's what I saw it as being. And I had my lawyers involved. He had his lawyers involved who didn't actually know who they were dealing with. And it kind of ended up just snowballing from that day where I found out who he was. I managed to freeze a good amount of money in his bank account in that day. And that day was probably the hardest day of my life, because I had to somehow fight, and I didn't know how it was going to look or how it was going to turn out. But I knew that if it wasn't coming from me, it just wouldn't happen, because at that point, when you're dealing with fraud and blue collar crime, the police don't really get invested straight away and help you out. It's kind of like, well, let's just see what this actually is. You're in the relationship with the person. Maybe you've just made a mistake with the investment.
Right.
But it became pretty clear at that point that it wasn't just that. So then,
just pause there for a second, because I want to get really clear on something that we're talking about. You met this guy, Tinder, correct?
Swiped right.
That should be the name of your podcast.
Don't swipe right.
Don't swipe right. And you formed a relationship with him. He formed a bond with you. I understand from what I've read, up to and including like meeting your kids and that sort of thing. So
he even brought his mother over from Australia and stayed with me.
So properly ensconced with your family. Although looking back on it now, you think 5.5 months, that's still a pretty quick transition, but certainly a transition into a permanent and serious relationship. And then at some stage, obviously moving down that track, as you've been saying, he conned you out of 300K. And then the Conning the Con podcast and the story that's been created, I guess, around you in the papers and around the world is that you conned him back again to get a good portion of this back. And the day you're talking about going to the bank, was the day you had to con him again into signing back to you some of the money. I read the article about it. It was a little bit unclear to me. I'm dyslexic, so I probably missed it rather than not being there. As to then, what did he think he was doing at that bank at that time? And the paper I think that I read also said the bank was in on this. So the bank knew what was going on. So in other words, they knew you were conning him, which means technically they knew you were doing something nefarious to this person, untruthful. But they also knew it was to get your stolen money back.
Yeah, exactly. I think the way it's been framed is that I'm conning is more that I was just doing the things that would allow me to get my money back, and it was just the fact that I had to play a part, which is not who I am. But unfortunately, at that moment, the part that I played was my family had found out, and they weren't happy with the situation, what I was doing, because I have a trust that my brother was involved with, and they were kind of going, "Oh no, you shouldn't be doing this," which, you know, they were at the end.
Yeah.
But it was the leverage that I could use. And the bank were very aware of his fraud status at that point. And we just needed to make sure that we did the steps in the right way to protect myself, which was to get that money back.
So
it was more that I played a part.
What was he actually signing to get you the money back? And what did he think he was signing?
Oh no, he signed the right documents. There was nothing about that he knew what he was signing. It was I had frozen $200,000 in one of the bank accounts, or the bank had, because they were aware that this was a fraudulent transaction after the fact.
Right.
And that was the moment there. The fraud department was completely aware of what was happening, and the fraud department talked to me and said, "There's only two options here for you. You either wait for the police to get to this and deal with it, and the money stays frozen, and you see if you can go down that legal route, or you get him to transfer that money back to you." So the only way that I could do that was going to the bank in person with him and convincing him that that was the best option for us to then at least move forward with our relationship.
So does that mean you actually said, "I want my money back, and if you want to continue with the relationship, give it back"? Or was it you saying, "Oh, look, there's been a technical glitch with the trust. I need to get the money back, but I'll give it back to you next week," sort of thing? So that was the trickery.
The money was never going to go back to him at that point, and he was aware of that.
Okay.
It was very much like, "I need that money back. My family's not happy. This is not what we're going to be doing."
Okay. So he was signing documents knowing that he was giving the money back to you. The con wasn't signing. He wasn't aware of what he was. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. That's what I was trying to figure out.
He couldn't have done that. That would have been a move. He knew that he was signing that money back over to me, and it was all legitimate transaction at that
So
point.
why did he do that?
I don't think I'll even know unless you ask the con man.
Why do you
For me,
think
I
he
don't
did
want any
that?
communication.
Yeah,
I think he did it because he was up against a wall, and that was his way of placating the situation. And if he didn't do that, then his house of cards was going to come falling down even more than it was going to come falling down.
What was the business investment for? What was the lie in the story he was telling you?
It's for a property in Queenstown that he'd even taken me to and showed me around that he was going to be developing. And he'd actually also put that out to investors in Queenstown as well to be involved in. So it was a bigger web than just my con. There was also an alcohol company and a restaurant. And my lawyers were also the lawyers of the alcohol company. So it was all very a bigger web than just me.
Did anyone else put any money in, any of the other groups?
One of them lost money due to the legal fees along the way. And one of them took my money as part of the alcohol investment because they didn't know it was fraudulent funds at that stage. And it meant that I, technically, with the document that I had signed, was that anything of his worth or any property that he owned or any assets would then go to me if he reneged on the document and the loan agreement, which he did. But unfortunately, that company didn't believe that document was sufficient for me to have those shares or that money back in their company. So it's been an interesting process looking at how we work as humans as well when these things go ahead.
Do you, so for clarity on the him defrauding you, was he ever going to develop the property and was he just didn't know how to do it, or was it just I want the money in my account and then I'm out of here?
Again, I don't know. I think there was so many balls in the air that he has this vision of grandiosity,
Right.
and that he wants to be this big businessman.
So he's a
but
narcissist.
He doesn't actually know how to. Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
I'm no clinical psychologist,
of
but the
course.
part of but from the learning I've done and working with a clinical psychologist on our podcast,
Right.
has helped frame the psychopathy behaviors. And it's very clear to me that those behaviors were, very narcissistic.
Wow. So you're in the bank, you've got to sign back over the money. You're 100K short from the family trust or whatever the point of the money has come out of. But the con, quote unquote con, or the role, as you say, is you saying, I need this money back if you want this relationship to go forward. But the role there is this relationship is never going forward. You're a dirtbag criminal.
Yep. It was the elephant in the room that I could never say for 2 months. It's like, I actually know who you are. I know what you're doing to me, but I had to be like, oh no, I'm really sorry this is happening to you as well as me. And it was just such a sordid manipulation that I just wanted to scream and yell at him, but I couldn't. I couldn't even call him out.
So was that the process of you finding this all out to standing in that bank? Was that 2 months?
No, that was the one day. That was literally the day I found out who he was. I stood in that bank, and then there was 2 months before he was came back into the country. And without being a spoiler alert, there was a border alert out for him and an arrest warrant on the border.
Okay, because is he Australian? Is that right?
He's Tasmanian.
Tasmanian, mate. That explains everything. So he was back in Australia. He came back to New Zealand, and that's when the spoiler alert legal stuff kicked in.
The arrest warrant was there, so he was arrested on landing, which that day was a very surreal day because even though it felt like I was safe because he'd been arrested and this sort of could stop this charade and emotional turmoil while carrying on as normal in many ways. Most people would have no idea that I was going through this.
Yeah.
And it was only the inner circle that were aware that what we were doing. And it was with the support of the police and with my lawyers. And I did change my lawyer over the time because of the right advice is pretty important when you are going through something like that.
For sure. So the 2 month that we were just talking about there, just for my clarity, was from the day at the bank through to his arrest. That's that 2 month window. Mm-hmm. In that 2 month window, are you still keeping up the pretense? Obviously, he's not in New Zealand, so no one has to worry about things like physical intimacy. But are you still keeping up the pretense on some level that you guys are an item for him to come back, or did you walk out after you did? I know the one of the articles talks about there was a hug after the thing, that skin crawling. But then was the pretense kept up for that 2 months to keep him placated? To keep you safe? What happened in that 2 months? Was that what you were doing?
So the vision I had on that day when I found out who it was, and my laser focus was, I need to make sure that I got as much money back as I could, that I could survive this for my kids and for myself, and that I was going to be healthy at the end of this, that I wasn't going to be destroyed because of it. So that actually meant for me, I had to keep up communication with him. I never saw him after the day in the bank. And it took 2 weeks before he fled the country and went back to Australia. So I definitely was on high alert because you don't know who these people are. They've literally lied from the minute you start. So there's a real strong fear for safety as you go through that. And it took, so the relationship piece was kind of going, I needed to keep up the conversation with him to be able to then go, can I get any more money back? This agreement was what I wanted. I wanted to get that. Any financial piece for me was going to make a huge difference as a single mum, post-divorce, running business yourself. It was like, this means a lot to me.
Right. Okay. Gosh. I mean, I don't want to sound flippant about this whole thing, but I'm like, so has the movie offer come in yet? Have you been approached? It's like, this sounds like it could be the next film that Joel Tobeck does somewhere in Queenstown, sort of thing.
Well, I have actually had conversations with people already, and there is people circling in many ways. I think my piece is, first of all, this is not everybody's way of dealing with a situation like this, to be so vocal on it and to be, here's my dirty laundry, I made a really big fuck up and you're all going to hear about it. that's not everyone's go-to. It's been part of my recovery, and I think I'm also that level of going, I put myself out there a lot. I don't know if I really want to see that in cinematography, but I'm going to sit and have the conversations, because the thing that comes back is the people that listen to the podcast and that reach out to me, it's impacting them more than I realize, more than my sister Sarah and I ever realized.
Yeah.
Because it's not just this layer of, oh, you've been conned, this is a great story, this is, the drama of it. It's like there is layers to this. There's lessons to be learned that I think many women and men can take away from it.
Well, look,
and that's the why. That's the reason why I'm doing it.
One of the things I was excited by, and let me just bring this up for people who are watching, is that this was an article that just came out yesterday in the New Zealand Herald, which is where I read yours. Scammed couple rattled after losing half their savings to fraudster. It's not the same as yours, but a couple was got the shock of their life when they realised over half of their savings had been withdrawn from the bank account. So fraud is out there. And ironically, there is a YouTuber called Mark Rober. Mark Rober is a very famous YouTuber. He only makes one YouTube video like one a month. But the one he made this month was on fraud. Now, it's not the same as yours, but what you've just said about people learning from it, I learned from Mark Rober, because I'm a bit of an arrogant shit who thinks I know my IT stuff. He showed how the fraudsters in these Indian call centers actually defraud people. And if this happened to me, if I hadn't seen this, I'd be like, holy crap. This is a bad thing. I'm going to show it a little bit. You can see it. And for people who are watching, they can see it. And if they can't, just look up Mark Rober. What they do for people who can see the screen who are watching us is they get into your computer. Obviously, we know about that. But the scariest thing is they then put the screen go black. They re-log into your bank account. And then when they're in your bank account, what they do is they go to your HTML and they change some of the titles.
Looks like a refund for $20,000, and you'll see why in a minute. And as he's editing away, he chats her up.
So he edits the HTML. This is the fraudster, and then they make it look like this person has received a $20,000 deposit. Now that is a different level. When I saw that, I was like, oh my goodness! If I saw on my bank statement plus $20,000, it would probably get me too. So I think the thing about the connection I'm making between the Mark Rober stuff and the you stuff is, I get it that you don't want your potentially embarrassing dirty laundry put out there, but man, the story you've got to tell will help a lot of people. I mean, it really will. As you've already heard from your podcast, and if that was on a big screen, even more so.
Yeah, I know. And I've got to sit with that, because I've got little people that are in my life that are my complete dictator of why I do this. At the moment, they think I'm a superhero. So as long as that's the way it goes, then great. But I still think there's a piece of me that's like, I'm doing it to help. We always said, Sarah and I said, it was only to help one woman. And we feel like there was actually one woman that really did resonate, and she's actually in the podcast, is the woman that he dated after me, Danielle, who's in Australia. Right. And she was not in a good space when she finally reached out to us, and she was very nervous. We thought we were getting catfished as well. We must admit, we were like, oh yeah, right. She's somebody dating him that's been going on here. And actually the way that experience impacted her was huge. And then being able to share and reduce the shame and embarrassment around it and go, you're not the only one. We are smart, intelligent, grounded, giving woman, and it's our empathy and our vulnerability that was preyed on. And like you said, this is not the only con that's out there. This is one of the versions, and we have layers of it in our society. It's disgusting how it penetrates everywhere.
That Mark Rober video, which I've watched once by myself and once with my kids, it's quite a long one. He normally does about 12-minute videos. It's like 26 minutes. Talks about $20 billion of fraud like that a year. So,
scary.
They send out 500,000 emails to get 500 people to call back the call center to try and get 5 targets in a one working shift. That's what they do in these call centers.
That's horrendous.
So, it's economies of scale. They just try and get the most vulnerable people at the most vulnerable time. One of the stories I tell in that one is about how an elderly woman had her husband die that week, and she got frauded 3 times in that week. Wow. So it's a very different story from yours as to how they do it, but the idea of fraud is just, it's repugnant. You're talking about, empathetic giving women. You also mentioned a bit earlier the phrase "fuck up." so looking back on it now, what do you? I mean, I often have this conversation with people that often our best attributes are also our worst attributes in some way. Like empathy, being empathetic, being giving, being caring. I was talking to someone the other day about being a mother hen. Being that mother hen person that looks after people is great, but they're also the people that get treated like doormats. So it's got a downside as well, because then people go, oh, the wrong people get attracted to them and go, oh, these people will do everything with me. I'll just make them do everything for me. So looking back on that now and going, empathy, all those positive affirming words you use, and then think they probably contributed to the quote unquote fuck up. How do you respond to that?
Well, I don't think I'd ever want to change the fact that I have empathy, because that's also what I do as a physio and as a human. I think it's knowing the boundaries that you put in place with it. And that's the lessons that come out from this, is understanding how your empathy can be used against you. And I think most, like you said, it can be your strength and your weakness. But I'm still going to keep it as my strength, because that is who I am as a woman and what I do with work and on my online stuff. It's the empathy piece is how we actually connect as humans. What's scary is that the psychopaths have this ability to pick up on that. So the research behind that is really powerful. When they have an empathy switch, they can turn it on and off.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and also what I think is there's these, you can learn attributes. I remember I was working for a radio station and they took us through one of those personality tests. It was quite an advanced scientific one. It was called, it doesn't matter what it's called, but it was like a 3-hour test, and they wanted to see how to get the best out of us, which is fine. And I found it quite difficult to do some of the questions around like, do you do things off the cuff or do you write lists? And I'm like, I do both. I find that I didn't know how to answer those. But the guy who was doing the assessment, whether you accept them or believe them or not, said to me that my results showed very clearly that I was an impromptu type personality, but I taught myself to write lists. So I think with this empathy thing, and I've been through some things in the last sort of 10 years where I feel like I can see masks quite quickly, because I feel to be quite an empathetic person and that, but I think I've taught myself through experience. I have a thing I call a bullshit nerve in the back of my neck. And the bullshit nerve goes off. And so it's almost like I think I'm probably naturally an empathetic person, but I've taught myself to identify bullshit. And those two things working together means, hopefully, without sounding arrogant, you can get the best of the empathy, but also protect yourself from the worst of the people trying to use it against you.
I think that's a really good way of looking at it. For me, it's my gut. It's my gut reaction. And what I've learned from this whole process is that I wasn't tuning into it. It was screaming at me so many times. So that gut reaction and that internal voice. And I go back to the fact that my good girl head, my good girl brain was like, nah, it can't be right. My thinking brain took over. And I wasn't listening to what my heart and my gut were saying, which is, this isn't good enough. I can't explain it, but I should be following through. But it was this kind of like insidious behaviors that made it harder to actually identify or find out what the truth was.
You're right. I suspect this question is going to be, you don't know the answer to this, but I'd be interested in your perspective on this. Do you think that this scumbag, dirtbag had any intention on actually having a relationship with you long term? Or was it only about the money? And basically there was at some point when, if he had got what he wanted to, he was always gone anyway.
It's a good question. I think it was from column B. So I think he would have always been gone.
So this is a five and a half month con job as far as he's concerned, and nothing more.
Yeah, it's something I must laugh at, because I look back at the journey I went on, and earlier on, after a few weeks afterwards, and I went for some counselling to process this stuff, process the shit of it. And the counsellor said to me, well, maybe he does actually care for you. And I just went, I don't think you're the right person for me to talk about, because that doesn't actually help my processing it. If he has feelings for both myself or the environment that I've created in my life, that is never any way that you behave to someone that you care for. So I still believe that I was a piece of his puzzle to go bigger, because I also know his pattern with women. I've looked back at it. We've done the research. The women that have reached out, and they've been manipulated and lied to and made to feel shit. and it's not okay. So I wasn't necessarily anybody special to him, is my feeling.
That's really interesting. So explain to me if this is what you're saying, because that's what I'm hearing, that you've put out a podcast, you've put out your story, and then women who knew him, maybe who have dated him, have gone, shit, that's that guy, and connected with you, and you've heard stories that way?
Absolutely.
Wow.
Several, one of them, they're in the podcast. Several on the
Crazy.
podcast, because we were like, and particularly because he got away with it. One woman, Kate, dated him when she was in her early 20s, went to Canada with him, and he stole money from her out of her bank account. And there's another incident where, and he basically lied and said, oh, we spent it on the way. And she had to go to his family to get the money back. It's a complete psychopathic behavior. So no, nothing was ever his fault. It was always blame game.
Like you said, I think you're correct to say that, not being a clinical psychologist, but those are certainly, if nothing else, those narcissistic tendencies, aren't they? Or actions that I'm the center of the world, everyone else is wrong, I'm never wrong, I don't need to apologize. You can apologize to me. It's actually your fault we're in the situation, not mine. Yeah. Seen that before.
And you start seeing it so clearly, I think, too. It's just actually, like you said, your radar is more up once you see these behaviours. And I think if I'd known this in my 20s, I would feel a lot more comfortable. And that's where I think it's resonating with a lot of women. It's like, oh, how do you build relationships and trust? There's so many elements to that.
While we've referenced your podcast a couple of times, let's show people if they want to check it out. It's called Connie the Con. Sarah Ferris, and Emma Ferris, and it's on everywhere you can get your podcast from. You started it December 1st. That was the first one, and then it's been basically
that was the trailer. That was the trailer out. Right. So we really only launched it in mid-January.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's great. I've listened to a bit of it as we've been prepping for this, and I've got it now in my system to be listened to as they come up. It's something you're going to continue, because obviously this theme is, your story is your story. And you talked about catfish. I love catfish. I watch it both by myself and with my kids when they're with me. And it's interesting that, Neve, the guy who runs Catfish, he went through a catfishing episode, and then he spun that into 8 years of television series where he's helping other people. I'm not saying you're going to quite do that, but do you see your experience being spun now into, this is something you want to talk to other people about, and an ongoing thing, rather than here's my 10-part series of what happened to me?
I think the world's open to both Sarah and I. Sarah's, my sister, who's based in London, is the narrator, the editor, and the writer in many ways. Has put it together. We both produced it, but she is the brains. She's never done podcasting before.
Yeah.
So the quality that she's created is amazing. And I think this is where we kind of go, there are more stories to tell. We want to kind of get through this experience first, because we've got this is 9th episode is out this week, and that's a pretty big episode, a pretty emotional episode to go out there. And what we've got coming up, still about another 3 or 4 more, and most of them we had already in the bank. We'd already done them, but as stories came up, we actually have added some extra ones in, and I think that's going to come out as these kind of topics that are really important, like how do you spot red flags? How does this work in the justice system? How do you actually recover after this process? So we don't know where it goes, and we want to make sure that it is serving a purpose. I think part of it would be the fact that there are so many con stories out there, but there's also a lot of con and true crime podcasts. So I think the reason why this is resonating so well with people, because we've already hit 90,000 downloads within, I think it's less than 2 months. And been at number 1 on the chart. So we're really proud of the fact that this is spreading like wildfire. Mm-hmm. But I think it's the fact that there are so many different con stories out there, that sharing somebody's truth and how they help them work through it is probably more where I sit with it.
Yeah. Because
that's my experience, is that, yes, you can be all conned and it's all drama, but actually you've still got to recover. You've still got to rebuild and find who you are. And I'm at the happiest and healthiest place I've ever been. And that's crazy after this whirlwind of experience.
I mean, obviously we all have our own experiences, and I don't ever like comparing experiences because everyone has a different space, but you can kind of see what I hear you saying for your experience echoes with sort of me and my experience. And it's nothing like criminal activity and being, defrauded, but when you go through a time of trial, and if you come out the other side learning from it and getting help for it and whatever else you need, you sort of are in a better place. I mean, I'm probably more chilled, relaxed and happy today than I've been for well, probably since my 20s sort of thing. And it's been a pretty rough sort of 5 to 10 years overall for me for various other reasons, not to do with criminal activity. But I guess what I'm just saying are those times that we are put under the pump hardest of all, if we can figure a way through them, and if we can, and I firmly believe in getting help for those reasons, then, you know, I don't want to use some bullshit example like, oh, you know, it takes a lot of pressure to make a diamond. But the reason those bullshit things exist is because there's some truth in them. You know, there's some truth in the analogies.
It was literally the quote that was going through my head. But I think that is but it's because the reality is it's how you step into those moments though. That is the piece, because they can break you and then they can make you.
Totally.
And that is the difference. And what I've learned from this, because even though I'm a physio, my passion and my learning has really been more in breathing coaching and stress management and trauma recovery before this was all happening. So ironically, I was made for this experience, and I had to test all these skills that I had to really step into it. And what I've learned along the way regarding stress is that the way that you perceive stress is actually going to make a difference to how your brain is going to release chemicals and how it's going to grow and develop. And that has made a huge difference to me when you understand the challenge response, not just the stress response.
Cool. And as people who are watching us can see up on the screen at the moment, your website, the breath effect. There's not a double E, is there? My dyslexia just played up for a bit there. I was going to say the breathe effect. That would be 2 E's. The breath effect.com is your website. I do want to talk to you about this because there have been some quite big podcasters around the world talking about the importance of breathing, other than the obvious, recently. But before we jump into that, I did want to ask you about dating, because many of us get to a certain age in life where, for me, it was like a 17-year marriage. And then for whatever reasons, that wraps up and you go back into that world. And I think much like yourself, because I'm pretty sure I read this, when I was married, if you got a date on the internet, you were basically hiring a prostitute, because that's what was on the internet in 1999, 2000, 2001. There was no, what do you call it? Like approved or societally acceptable dating sites on the internet. So go through a 17-year marriage, come out the other end, and something like 1 in 3 marriages today are people who have met on the internet. So it is the new bar. You know, you don't go into a bar now and meet someone across a crowded room and lock eyes. You see their profile and swipe left or right, like you said. We're a different age, you and I, but I read of a similar experience to you.
Different.
What do you think about the dating scene now? And I know you've had a really bad experience with it, but your experiences then, and like subsequently, have you dipped your toe or anything again? How do you think about building relationships and stuff in 2021 versus 2000 or 2005 or whatever it is?
This is such a big can of worms, but a good can of worms to talk about. Because
Sure.
I think this is the new normal. Doesn't mean that it's that we don't need to think about this in a different way. So I was similar to you. I'd been with my partner and husband since I was 22 and married for several years, and so 13 years together. So coming out of that relationship, all of my friends were like, you need to go on, do the online dating and try it. Like, they're living vicariously through me in many ways. And I lived in a very small town rurally, so it was like, here's your option. But it was interesting. Like, I think there's a real weird social experiment with that dating online process. And I wasn't out for a quick moment. I was still looking for somebody and looking for that long-term connection. And that's kind of, I guess, what I was maybe had a target on my back for in some ways, you know, with the empathy and trust building.
Right.
But you know what? Everybody deserves happiness and love and that connection. That's all that I was going out for, and that's what you'll be looking for as well. And so I do laugh at this, because actually when this was all going on, I had friends of mine set me up on a blind date. So when I say when it was going on, after I knew who he was and before he got arrested, I was set up on a blind date with this lovely guy. And I remember being on this date going, I wish I had like a newspaper and I could take a photo and be like, ha ha ha, I've got proof of having a life. And like, just be like, to show that you haven't mucked me over, mate. I will build my trust. And you are not the example of every man out there.
Sure.
And that's been a big piece for me to get through, because when somebody to take that time to get to know somebody is interesting. And I've met some lovely men. No one as yet at this point has sort of been in that longer term status as yet, but I am dating, and I've met some nice people recently that make me go, okay. But I haven't dated online for a while. So, because for me, one of the things is that it's very hard to get to know someone's backstory when you don't know where they are. And when we used to date people, it was because they were in our 2 kilometer radius of work and life.
Yeah.
Now it's because we choose 2 kilometer radius to like get to know them. And that's definitely a different way of doing it. So I think that it's an interesting place to sort of date, as you may have noticed.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, and like just referencing back to the catfish program, and obviously part of this is, again, economies of scale, because America is a very large country, is that how you can be dating someone you've never met face-to-face in this whole internet age. I do think that's probably a millennial and a Gen Z thing. I'm Gen X, so I'm just the bottom end of Gen X. So I do think it's a more of a Gen Y, Gen Z thing. That, I mean, I could never imagine, even if you found someone online that you totally fell for their whole shtick, I could never imagine saying I'm dating this person living in Sydney or in Wellington when I'm in Dunedin, or whatever it is. It just doesn't make sense to me as well. But I mean, the online dating thing is interesting as well, because if you're just chatting with people, I think you can get to know quite a lot, assuming there's honesty there. But equally, it's very hard to hide. I mean, it's very easy to hide a lot as well, because it's always, no one's ever put up the first photo they've taken of themselves on a internet dating. It's always the 9th or 10th when you've dipped your chin just right to hide all my double chin, and just the right angle, and oh no, we'll just move that from the background. So it's never the first thing. Whereas if you see someone across a crowded room, then that's it. You see them as they are right there and then. They don't have the chance to put 7 filters on. Oh my God. I put that filter on me the other day where it takes your beard off. Holy crap, that was terrifying. Just for fun. I want to see that one. Yeah, so I think it would seem to me that places like Tinder or Find Someone or whatever the thing is, I've got Bumble. Female friends who use Bumble. That's the female one, isn't it? That they have all the power. Is that right?
They have power to a point. But
yeah. Is that it is kind of like the new pub, except it's like the new pub where everyone's dressed perfectly, says the right things, and you don't know about their skeletons. So you can treat it like a pub, but you treat it like a pub with more than just a grain of salt, like a kilo of salt. I worked with a parenting group, 15 years ago, and the internet's gone on and on and on. And I remember it was when internet chat rooms and stuff were a big thing. And we made this piece for radio, and what we did was we had a young girl talking to a young boy on the internet, and it was like we used their voices, but then all of a sudden halfway through the conversation we turned the young boy's voice into a 45-year-old man's voice, and then it became incredibly disturbing and creepy. But what we were portraying is you don't know who's on the other side of that keyboard. It's a bit different now with all the photos and Tinder, but it's essentially the same. So
I think there's a lot of safety issues with it too. I mean, I'm only a very crazy story, but there are a lot of people that have been hurt, and there was the case of the woman in Auckland who was murdered, the British girl. And I think as women, we're maybe a little bit sometimes blasé about that experience because everybody's doing it. And I think one of the things is actually putting some more safety boundaries in place for yourself. Let people know where you're going, who you actually are supposed to be dating, and do it in a time frame that works for you, and take it slow. We're very trusting in our culture. And some people are. I definitely, that was probably my fault, is too trusting. And you've got to take time to get to know these people and know their backstory. Sometimes they won't, like you said though, that skeletons, and everybody has them. Even if you did meet them in the pub, they're not going to be like, right, here's my skeletons, come and check them out. They're going to be, they hide them away. And I've done that. I've dated people and I'm like listening, and like you said, you've got that little radar, and you're just observing for a while. And it's a weird place to be, where you're like, I feel like now, unfortunately, that person that's going to come into my life has to really earn that trust. But they can listen to the podcast and be like, "This is why." And
or you'll surely you'll have a target on your back to be afraid of now. If guys know what you've done, and they'll be like, this chick's got she's got it down. She knows the bullshit going on." I was going to say to you about you don't know the skeletons in the pub. You're right, But I think there is still an element removed. Like if some guy on Tinder or girl talks about being wealthy or being a doctor or being whatever, you can't do much about it. If you meet them in the pub and then you see them driving off in a $600 car, you kind of go, well, that's already not making sense. So I think it removes an element of unknown and introduces an element of revealing skeletons a bit more easily.
I think what's kind of changed it for me though is that these people are out there though, and we don't realize. And so just people being aware that they have to just take a step back sometimes and listen and check around before they move forward with things. It's hard because it's the environment we're in now with meeting people in that way. For me, I am very much about building my network of social life outside of that. So I am I'm doing things that make me feel good, which is not everybody's favorite things. So jiu-jitsu, if you've that's part of being my recovery, is doing a martial art. And that has been, and I get to meet some amazing people there. It's not that I'm trying to go and, date them all or anything like that, but I get to meet these people that make me feel safe and connected and as humans. And I think part of it is kind of knowing that we don't actually have to have somebody in our life. It is great when we do find someone that we connect with, but to not settle and to make sure that the right people come in. And so you've got to find yourself, putting yourself out there and building your life, trying these new things. I do Toastmasters, I do other things that help me build my world around me. And therefore you meet people naturally. You can still do that. We can still meet people naturally. It's just about, growing your universe and your world.
I was going to say as well, as you were talking about these people are out there, I was just thinking about having a conversation around bullying, that bullying's always been there. It's just a different iteration of it. In the old days, it used to happen at school. Then it would happen at school and on the landline. And then it would happen at school and now it's happening at a school and in the kid's bedroom because they've got cell phones. So the bullying can go straight. I mean, and what I was thinking was on some levels, it's the same. Scammers have always been there. This is there's just new ways of doing it. When you introduce the online, then it just opens up a whole new world to them. I was trying to find out, I haven't found it. I'm pretty sure the Tower of London and the Statue of Liberty and all these sorts of things have been sold to people in the past. People rich, I was going to say dumb, that's not fair. Rich, gullible people have been sold these things that were going to get shipped to their mansions and they've never turned up because they've just been ripped off, Scammers have always been there. This is just the iteration of it today as to what they're doing, how they're doing it, which is a shame.
Yeah, I think and that's the thing is that they are out there in lots of different ways. And the more we get alert to that, the better we're going to be at protecting ourselves at whatever stage and age we're at. I mean, I think there's one of the cases that's been in the media recently, and it's quite close home to you, is the Barry Clue case. Have you seen that one at all?
Yeah, I've seen it around, yeah.
And actually my sister's father and mother-in-law were actually one of the people that were conned. And so we know a lot about that. So ironically, my sister's been surrounded by major cons in New Zealand. And the level of deception there has been horrendous. But what I don't understand is as we've gone through the justice system, is how it's actually not victim focused. It's defendant or the criminal focused. Mm-hmm. And so these people that took millions and millions of dollars aren't actually rehabbed or supported to go and to turn a leaf or to actually do the right time. It's amazing to go through and watch it.
Yeah, and it seems I've always found it difficult to understand that if it's a civil case, the police don't want to get involved for whatever the thing is. I kind of think if someone steals from me or gets from me something in a nefarious way and it's significant especially, then I think that's a gap in the justice system as well, that they kind of go, well, it's a civil case, you need to take them to court. Whereas we all know taking a fraudster to court after they've spent it all, you get $5 a week for the next 40 years and then never recover it. But yeah, look, I know we've got a kind of hard target to hit, so I would like to talk to you briefly about breathing. Again, The Breath Effect is your website, thebreatheffect.com. You said you've been working with, it says, change your life for the better with simple and natural solutions to stress, anxiety, illness, and pain. Now, you've already talked about you're doing this before your experiences with the con. Obviously, things like stress, anxiety, and pain, well, certainly stress and anxiety, must have been it must have been a hugely interesting and positive skill to have coming out the back of this. But I'd like to know more about the idea of what you do with the breath effect and how it can positively impact us and stuff.
Well, like you said, there is so much awareness now out there with breathing, from Wim Hof to James Nestor's book on breathe. And it's great to have education. A lot of it's about understanding the stress response. And so the more we get in tune with our own stress response, we can understand how our body can then be brought back into a calm state. So if I look back at what happened to me, and maybe for you as well, Pat, we're thinking about your experiences of going through the grief of marriage separation as well, our body gets hijacked along that process. And learning to actually change the body's response is what helps to manage the psychology and the emotions piece. And so there is lots of ways of doing that. Breath is one piece of that puzzle, but it's actually the grounding force. That's why breathing training is in your yoga, meditation, mindfulness, Tai Chi, Pilates. And people go, oh, I feel so much better after doing those things, but they often don't know the why. So for me, it's about joining the dots and explaining how the science behind stress and the stress reaction will take the body over, and how it will impact the muscles, will change your breathing pattern, rhythm, rate, muscle tone, muscle activation. And it actually ends up changing your autonomic nervous system. So I'm not sure if you heard about that before, but it's the underlying system that controls your digestion, your heart rate, your blood pressure, and your breathing's part of that. So really with breathing, what it's doing, it's your best way of, because it works both consciously, because you are breathing right now, and unconsciously, to shift your nervous system back into that safe response. And that's really what I'm teaching, is people to understand how you move from that continuum of trauma to safety, because that's what our evolutionary need is all about. It's about understanding that we're always going to get hijacked. Our body's always going to be stressed, because that's our survival response. What we're not good at doing is figuring out how to reset that and feel calm and actually make a big difference to all our health, our relationships, and even our communication.
Yeah. And I guess for those of us who don't really understand, I think about improving the body. I think about, getting fitter and working your muscles. And I think about, improving your diet and ways that I guess society would understand more about becoming healthier. What is it about breathing? What is it about the process and what you teach that can kind of help some of those same areas that most of us would consider, like food, exercise, meditation, things to take away stress, even medication on some levels?
Such a good question, Pat, because that is exactly what I'm trying to educate people on, is that food is great to be looking at that and what you're taking in as your building blocks. But if your nervous system isn't set up to absorb that in the right way, or if your body is in a stressed state, it thinks it's supposed to be either storing it, where we put weight on,
right,
or we're able to use it up too much and our bodies get stuck in the system. So the breathing's the way that you tell your body that it can process these things in the right way. If you do exercise and you're not able to breathe in a pattern that helps to keep the body in a restorative pattern, it can impact the muscles that you're using. It can impact the way that your body will recover, and even things like your blood chemistry and, again, that nervous system reaction. And in the regards to the medication piece, the way that you can use your breathing, there's so many levels or illnesses that people kind of go, oh, well, I need to take a pill for that, like blood pressure, anxiety, panic attacks, all these areas that people aren't looking at the why. And so that when you step back from it and we go, what are the triggers in our lives? How does it impact our body? How does it change our nervous system? And that's kind of hidden. So when I work with people one-on-one, or I work on my online stuff, I'm teaching them how to hold a mirror up for their own health and patterns. And the great thing is you can shift them. It's just like your awareness of people being aware of that kind of radar, people not behaving well. You can be aware of your own body, and it just takes moments of consciousness and education. And then depending on where you are in your life, you may actually need to work harder to reset your nervous system. Or it can be a quick fix where you're just going to do a few things every day and that helps to feel better.
I noticed, and it's not coming up for me now because I wanted to make sure people were aware, there was like a 15-minute video or something. I'm rebooting the page as I speak to you, see if I can get it to pop back up. I'm not going to get it to pop back up, but you are the person who runs this thing. So tell us about is there an offer, or is there an opportunity for some people to... Yeah, well, tell us what people can do if they want to come see you at the Breath Effect.
So there's two things. One of the things that helps people identify if their breathing is impacting their nervous system is the quizzes that are on my website. There is Test Your Breath, which looks at your breathing habits. And again, you kind of go, well, I am breathing, but there is a ways that you can breathe in a more optimal way to help teach your body that it's safe. So that's under my little Test the Breath button. And then there's another one called the Nijmegen questionnaire, which is a scientific questionnaire that was used both clinically and in research to look at a condition called hyperventilation syndrome. And 1 out of 10 people have hyperventilation syndrome. But really that's that continuum of being stuck in that stress state for long periods of time. And the other thing I have in there is two freebies. One is called Stress Reliever, and the other one is called the Stress Buster. And they are designed to help you figure out what is the right pathway for you. It could be both. So the stress reliever is about releasing those muscles that become tight when you've been stuck in that stress state for long periods. And then the stress buster is about teaching the education and that why behind the breathing connection and just starting to shift the patterns so that you can notice how your body is adapting to it. So they're both there for people to come back to, and they're kind of a precursor to figure out, how I work, and that it's not a one size fits all model with breathing. I wish it was, because that'd make it easy to make you do the Wim Hof breathing, jump in some cold water and feel better with it. But actually not everybody's body is designed for that. I know from the patients I work with that it's actually about learning to reset your nervous system to calm first. Then you can manipulate your breath more to use the faster breaths to get more of the dopamine, happy hormone hit. But you've got to be able to bring it down before you can turn the volume up.
I'm reading the stress one at the moment, the Stress Buster. It says, who could do with this free 15-minute video? Anyone who spends a lot of time at a desk. Yep. Busy mums, desperate for a clear mind. Well, busy dads. Yep. Anyone suffering from pain or anxiety. Yep. Those keen to retrain their breathing habits to find optimal health and wellness. Yep. Anyone struggling with neck and back pain. Yep. Who wants to holistically reduce pain. I think that's probably something in there is approximately 5.5 million New Zealanders. Approximately. Oh, maybe not.
Yeah,
let's leave the kids under 14 out of it. So, four and a half million people.
Screwed over these days.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
The technology and the things they've got to deal with. But one of the things that I look at, even for, I was thinking for you, Pat, just as I'm able to see you there, and like you said about the sitting at the computer, is that most of us don't realize that we're staying stuck in this hyperinflated pattern of the kind of inhale and that chest expanding. So even just taking one moment to breathe out the mouth. There you go. Deflate your chest.
I'm a bit of a mouth breather because I went to a specialist recently for my eyes, and they pointed out that the cartilage in my nostril collapses when I breathe in, when I go, so my nostrils close, and that's apparently a bit of an issue when it comes to things like potentially snoring at nighttime and that kind of stuff, is that when the cartilage goes. So I do mouth breathing quite a bit, but I think that's natural because sometimes my nose breathing is a little bit reduced. Restricted, yeah.
So a bit chicken and the egg there, though, because you can train your nose to work better. And then if it doesn't work, it doesn't get used. So it's a bit of a figuring out how you get it to shift, and then the body pattern as well.
I might have to do your free seminars to kickstart and see what we can do, because I think that anything to improve your health is a good thing, especially if it's effective and it works. And I like the idea of kind of rejigging a part of your system. You're talking about the nervous system to aid and help other parts work better. I think it makes sense. I mean, that's like you change the oil in your car, and that's the oil change, but it helps so many other areas of the engine work just with the new oil.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good analogy.
Hey, thank you. I like my analogies. Emma Ferris, let's have a look again. Conning the Con, as people can see on their screen with me right now, is the podcast, and you can also go The Breath Effect, thebreatheffect.com, to find out more about breathing. And I guess we're talking about the dangers and the ills and stuff with online dating. I guess the beautiful thing about all the online world we live in right now is you can reach people in Queenstown and Dunedin and Auckland and Sydney and Los Angeles. It just doesn't matter. It's all available to all of them all the time.
Absolutely. I'm very lucky with that. I work with people all around the world, from Ireland, Germany, and just work on the time zones. And that works very well for my 30-day courses, because people can still get that support wherever you are in the world. So I'm very lucky in that mindset. That's the upside of the internet.
There you go. And I'm very, very happy you just said Ireland in the correct way. That excites me a lot as well. Hey, Emma Ferris, thanks for joining us. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Part of me thanks you for your story and also empathizes with your story, because there's still outstanding monies and stuff, but it's an important story to tell. And look, I think you should do that big screen adaptation. And then once you do, the missing money will get back to you tenfold over once they buy your story. And then financially you'll be up, and hopefully you'll be able to help some other people. But that's just my arrogant thoughts.
Well, ironically, it could have been the best investment of my life.
Emma Ferris, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Pat.